River degradation is an issue that's really troubling a lot of people in the U.S. right now. And honestly, how can you just ignore it when waterways, no matter their size, are fading right before people's eyes? Excessive water extraction leads to stream and riverbeds breaking down, and that means less water for farming, industry, and everyday people. On top of that, degradation means a loss of biodiversity. With every passing year, riverside areas are home to fewer and fewer plants and animals. To reduce the negative impact, almost every state is carrying out expensive projects to restore rivers and streams. And it's a huge hit to the budget since they've got to pay workers, rent equipment, buy materials. Basically, it's draining the coffers. Meanwhile, in Idaho, they've decided that the problem of degrading waterways can be solved with the help of some well-known animals, beavers. How exactly? That's what we're going to figure out today. The rivers and streams of Idaho aren't just waterways, they're the beating arteries that keep life going. They feed farmland, provide drinking water to towns and cities, and are a vital home to countless animals that live near or right in the water. But as usual, decades of human development have taken their toll, and the people of Idaho are now facing a harsh truth. Many of their waterways have seriously deteriorated. The need for water in farming and growing cities has led to large-scale water withdrawals from rivers and lakes, especially during dry summer months when water's in shortest supply. Many stream sections that used to flow almost all year round have started drying up much earlier. This creates tough conditions both for people, who now get less water for industry and farming, and for aquatic creatures for whom rivers and streams are home, or at least a temporary shelter. Climate change only makes this problem worse. Less snow in the mountains and earlier melting means less water flows into streams right when it's most needed to keep things alive. Besides that, the growth of cities and farmland has often ignored how fragile coastal areas really are. Straightening riverbeds to make building or irrigation easier, cutting down riverside forests that hold the banks together and provide shade, all of this has led to irreversible changes. Without natural protection, streams get wider and shallower, and the water warms up. This destroys the cool, oxygen-rich spots many species need to survive and leads to more erosion. Plus, more sediment builds up, clogging up the spawning grounds, cutting fish off from a place to reproduce, and shrinking the living space for aquatic insects that fish mainly feed on. In the end, these problems lead to a critical drop in biodiversity. When waterways get warm, silty, and broken up, they just can't support the once thriving fish and other aquatic life anymore. That's not just an ecological disaster, it's also a financial blow for a state that relies on fishing and nature tourism. And that's just one line in a long list of economic damage. When the flow gets lower, people need to look for other water sources, both for themselves and for industry and agriculture. Most of the time, the alternative costs a lot more. For example, digging new wells or deepening existing ones to tap into underground water. Besides, it's not certain this option will work, because underground water has degraded just the same due to human impact. Pumping was happening and still happens on bigger and bigger scales, depleting the aquifers. And their replenishment often happens thanks to streams and rivers. Yeah, those very waterways that are degrading. In short, people take more water out of the ground than what goes back in. So these underground treasuries keep shrinking. Birch Creek, a stream in Franklin County, southeastern Idaho, became a clear example. One rancher recalls that as a kid he fished and swam there all summer. But by 1995, when he started raising cattle, it was difficult to find food and water for the livestock around the creek. Yes, as you can see, the creek ran into the same problems as other waterways in Idaho: overgrazing, water diversion, and a bunch of other issues that led to its decline. What used to be a year-round water source turned into one that supplies this vital resource for much less time. And the land near the creek, which once could feed livestock, is turned into something you'd hardly call a food source because of overgrazing. In 2005, this rancher developed an innovative system of high-intensity, short-duration rotational grazing across several grazing allotments. Thanks to cooperation with the U.S. Forest Service as part of this sustainable plan, he managed to restore local plants, which now serve as abundant feed. However, unfortunately, this didn't help with the water shortage. The creek kept drying up just the same. So at certain times, the cattle still had to find other ways to quench their thirst. Due to the degradation of the stream, not only the local farm animals suffered, but also the wild ones, specifically the Bonneville cutthroat trout. Its population in Birch Creek was already damaged for many reasons, but the general decline of the watercourse pretty much killed off the species in this region. This could have kept going, but one day the rancher had an idea that what Birch Creek really needed to be saved was more beavers. And that's where the story of reintroducing these beloved rodents to southeastern Idaho begins. There was a time in the state, as in nearly all of the U.S., when there were so many beavers in their ponds that they could flood California, Oregon, and Washington. But then, suddenly, European colonizers arrived in North America and began the intense hunting of these toothy critters. Well, you know how the story goes. The drop in animal populations was so drastic that many rivers and streams lost them entirely. That's exactly what happened with Birch Creek in Idaho. And that was another reason the creek degraded to the state described by one of the ranchers, but eventually reintroduction began, bringing animals back to the creek where they once lived peacefully. In 2008 and 2009, beavers were released into Birch Creek. Ranchers, just like those who were following the project, expected everything to change. However, not a single animal stayed. As they say now, some of them fell prey to predators, and others ran off looking for a better place to live. And you know what? Instead of trying to save the creek with beavers, the rancher made a partnership deal with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service to arrange water supply to tanks for his cattle. As a result, the livestock got water, the struggling trout wasn't saved, and the story about reintroducing beavers in southern Idaho didn't have a follow-up. But that was only for a short while. In 2014, a rancher came across an article about people using beaver dam analogues to create habitats for rodents before their return to the watershed. Beaver dam analogues are simple, basic structures that are easy to build by hand using clay, cobblestones, and roots, or by weaving small branches through posts driven into the stream bed. They mimic real beaver dams and serve as the initial building material that helps beavers recolonize the creek. The rancher immediately called two experts who worked at Utah State University and the company Branch Solutions. They helped build 19 artificial dams on the water back in 2015. Then the rancher teamed up with the U.S. Forest Service and the Idaho Fish and Game Department to relocate 5 beavers to Birch Creek, who happily settled there, using the areas formed by man-made dams as their home. Now imagine this. By 2019, the number of dams built by the beavers themselves had reached 149. So the number had grown almost 8-fold in just 4 years since they started building these artificial beaver structures. And you know, this completely changed the situation on Birch Creek. When beavers build a dam, their engineering approach changes the flow dynamics. Tree trunks, branches, and stones weave together into a wall that slows down the rushing water. The river, or stream, which used to race through its channel, now flows more quietly behind the dam, and the water fills the pond that forms instead of rushing instantly down the valley. Then comes the dry season, when the stream or river doesn't get enough water. Before the beaver dam showed up, the waterway simply ran dry during this time. But after the nature's engineers built their structure, even in such a tough period, the stream still has water. The beaver reservoir slowly releases what it has stored. Research shows in areas with beaver dams, water stays in the channels for weeks and months longer than in similar spots without beavers. This boosts the annual flow duration by about 30 to 50% on average. And if we talk specifically about Birch Creek, the stream has been flowing for a full 42 days longer, right up until the first freezes in October. Local ranchers and researchers call this the river getting back to working all season long. Besides that, as the pond fills up, its water surface spreads wider across the floodplain, increasing the contact area between water and the shoreline soil. This creates conditions for slow seepage of water through sediment and soil pores, feeding the underground aquifers. Field data show that in areas with dams, groundwater levels rose by 1.6 to 3 feet higher than in places without such structures, and that's incredibly helpful for rivers and creeks like Birch Creek, which sometimes dry up. The thing is, during dry spells, groundwater flows back into the river. Yes, it's a process that doesn't provide a whole lot of water, but still, this way an extra bit of liquid shows up in the waterway, giving the local animals something to drink and making herders happy. It's just as important that the beaver dams helped bring back the Bonneville cutthroat trout to Birch Creek. To begin with, it's clear the trout were pretty happy that ever since the beavers were reintroduced, water's been sticking around in the stream way longer than before. The beaver ponds also played a big role. For the cutthroat trout, these reservoirs became absolutely crucial, giving the fish a place to hide from predators in deeper spots and keeping the water cool and steady even during the hottest summer months. That's essential for this cold water-loving species. On top of that, the new ponds greatly expanded the space available for the fish to live in. Fish, livestock, these aren't the only animals animals that benefit from beavers and their structures because the arrival of these rodents in rivers and streams is a natural remedy that boosts biodiversity. No one's going to deny that plants love water. What's more, they absolutely need it to grow. It's a key resource. So thanks to beaver dams, the area of wetlands around the stream expands, which means different kinds of plants get more space to grow. And they don't pass up such a great opportunity. So, for example, there were studies comparing regular waterways where beavers hadn't started doing their thing and streams and rivers where the rodents had really gotten to work building dams. As a result, it turned out that in places with beaver ponds, there are over 30% more species of aquatic and riparian plants than in rivers left untouched by the rodents. As vegetation grows, so does the variety of invertebrates. In those same ponds, scientists recorded a lot more species of water beetles and plenty of other insects too, since the gentle flow and nutrient-rich environment create perfect conditions for them to breed and thrive. Observations also show that dragonflies and other tiny creatures, ones that don't live in the water full-time, settle on the trunks of fallen trees and in flooded bushes, taking advantage of what the water has to offer. But nature is harsh, so insects don't get to enjoy the good life for long. Along come those who are more than happy to feast on them. Yes, these are frogs, salamanders, and other amphibians. Beaver ponds are a food source for them, like a cafeteria where there's something for every taste. But more than that, the water surface lets frog and salamander larvae finish developing without the risk of drying out. As a result, the number of such species in areas with beaver dams goes up several times compared to spots without them. Of course, all this biodiversity soon draws in the birds. In the quiet backwaters and along the shallow edges, ducks and geese settle in, finding both shelter and feeding spots. The abundance of aquatic plants and insects attracts mallards, pintails, and even some rare waders. Then come the herons and storks, swooping down to the ponds for an easy meal of small fish and amphibians. Predatory birds don't stay on the sidelines either. Along the pond edges, kites and buzzards hunt, scanning for small mammals and fish. And in the bushes by the shore, you can spot eagle owls, for whom a rich food supply like mice, frogs, and insects has become a guarantee of successful breeding. And finally, mammals show up. For example, for river otters and muskrats, beaver ponds are a spot with a wide range of food. They eat both insects and small amphibians. Besides that, these animals can just live there. The shoreline bushes are the perfect place to hide from bigger predators. In the end, the beaver dams on Birch Creek created a patchwork system of ponds and riparian meadows where every new element from plants to predators adds to the ecosystem. This kind of network of ponds and nearby areas boosted the overall biodiversity of the landscape and also made the ecosystem more resilient to climate changes and stresses caused by humans. There's another effect they got from bringing beavers back to Birch Creek, lowering the fire danger in the area. And you know, that's really important because Idaho's a state that often deals with raging wildfires. Idaho's among the most fire-prone states in the U.S. because of the combo of a dry climate, plenty of flammable forests, and frequent thunderstorms. Summers here are hot and dry. In 2024, some areas saw multi-day stretches with temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and relative humidity below 15%. These conditions dry out the pine needles and dead branch layer on the ground and create perfect conditions for fires to start. The second reason for fires is the accumulation of combustible material in the forests. Due to fighting natural low-intensity fires and bark beetle infestations, dozens of millions of cubic feet of dead wood are piling up in the central and northern regions of the state, which during dust storms can be easily ignited by lightning or sparks from machinery and then rapidly carry the fire across vast areas. The stats from recent years show the scale of the threat. In 2023, Idaho recorded 892 wildfires, which covered 88,000 acres, one of the highest figures among all the northwestern states in the U.S. However, this is kind of a typical number for Idaho. There have been occasional fires that led to bigger consequences. For example, in 2007, the Murphy Complex fire burned 652,000 acres of forest in the southern part of the state. In 2015, the Soda Fire happened, which caused the loss of about 279,000 acres of forest cover. And just recently, in 2021, the Snake River Complex fire burned nearly 109,000 acres near Lewiston. Each of these major fires, along with dozens of smaller blazes every year, means evacuations and losses. On top of that, towns on the edge of national forests have to prepare defensible fire zones, and farmers and city folk need to reinforce their homes and clear out dead wood around them. But could beavers really fix such a serious fire situation? Let's be honest, nature's chief engineers aren't a silver bullet, but still they are an effective way to slow down the spread of fire. Beavers build dams that create large ponds and swampy areas. These bodies of water hold moisture, soaking into the surrounding soil and keeping groundwater levels high. As a result, the vegetation around beaver ponds stays much wetter and greener even during dry spells when the rest of the landscape dries out and becomes prone to fires. This moist vegetation works as a natural fire barrier. When the fire approaches, it either slows down or stops completely, running into a water-heavy zone that barely burns or won't burn at all. The firefighting benefits of beavers go beyond just prevention. When fighting fires in full swing, beaver ponds become vital sources of water. Helicopters can grab water from them to dump on burning areas, and ground crews get easy access for pumps and hoses. Also, these wet zones can serve as safe shelters for firefighters in emergencies and act as anchor spots for creating fire breaks. In short, beavers are amazing animals. Their reintroduction was done with one goal: to keep Birch Creek from drying up. But in the end, people saw the restoration of a degraded waterway, increased biodiversity, and fire protection. You could say a universal solution to problems.